Hey everybody, welcome back to the Quest for the Bestest. It's that podcast where we are trying to figure out, we're going on an adventure, a quest you may say, to figure out which of the best picture winners is truly the very best of them all. And boy oh boy, it's only going up from here, because if you know about what happened last week, we talked about Crash. I just want to get into it because we found the worst one. We did it, guys. Crash, 2004, Paul Haggis, square at the bottom, number 41. We're getting into the housekeeping right away because I love it so much. And well, just to let you know, give a little flavor for what we're talking about today. It's 1981, Chariots of Fire, directed by Hugh Hudson, and a movie.
Yeah,
we've got some thoughts. Some people would argue that they have not very many. Others would differ. But before we get into that, I want to hand it off to Abram for our featured comment from last week's episode.
Yeah, so we actually got two comments on Crash in there. They're both short, so I'm going to share both of them there. They operate in a similar vein to what we were saying about this film. So first we have Lupin, our friend Seth, who's in the Discord, join the Discord, who simply writes, "Racism solved." Yeah. And then right below him, we have Jake Smith, who writes, "This movie is an excellent candidate for a group hate watch, though, especially if you have a diverse friend group." So, sure. Utility in Crash, I suppose. Probably not the utility that one Mr. Paul Haggis was hoping for, but at least the movie lives on in infamy, I guess. Who knows? Yeah. I think the less that we say about Crash this week, the better.
Yeah. And every week.
Yes, let's move right past that and into Chariots of Fire. It has a famous scene. It has a scene that everybody knows, and let's just talk about it. Someone want to give me a plot synopsis really quick? Anyone have that off the top of their head? What's really going on in this film?
There are two British lads. Well, I guess one of them is actually Scottish. There are two men, and they are both runners. And maybe there's one of them that's a Christian. His name is Eric Little. And the other guy is a Jewish man. His name is Harold Abrahams. And they both get recruited into the Olympics. And then they both run in the Olympics.
Excellent. That's what happens in this movie. You probably didn't need to add any more detail because it's not very relevant. So, thoughts? Anyone want to lead us off?
No.
Not really?
Not really.
Oh.
I will start.
Okay,
I can start. I do have some thoughts.
Timo, go for it.
And I don't usually start, but... yeah, I don't know. I mean, this movie was kind of boring. Not very interesting to me, to be honest. I see some merit in it. I see that famous scene, with the music, bum, 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 bum. It's in the middle, or it's in the beginning of the film. I saw it, and I was like, cool, that's the scene I know. And then largely just kind of rode the waves of this film, not really paying too much attention. Didn't really draw me in that much. Didn't think it was terrible, but pretty mid on every level in my mind.
Yeah. I will say that here's my sort of thing with this movie. There are bones. There's the bones. There's a structure of a very good film here. This film has everything that it needs to be a very good and memorable film. It's just the ligaments, the connective tissue there is just very, very thin and almost non-existent, to the point of it's very hard to remember a lot of the connective moments in this. And the bones are of the structure are, some very basic character traits that Eric and Henry is his name.
Harold.
Harold.
Harold. Thank you. Eric and Harold have, you have a handful of running scenes that you can maybe remember, but outside of that, like I said, that connective tissue that really makes a strong film is just not here in this one.
Yeah, I think for me, the reason this movie doesn't really hit any particularly high marks is because, well, the Olympics are a fantastic thing. It's it's the top of humanity performing at their very best.
It's also a little timely, for us.
Sure,
the
Olympics the Olympics are happening right now. Yeah, well, I didn't watch any of it, but the two people that they choose to focus on in this aren't particularly memorable characters. Or people in general. They won gold medals, but that's really all you can say about them. And a lot of people have done that. In fact, one per race, per everything in every Olympics for the entirety of history have done that exact thing. And I'm just curious as to why this particular story was chosen for these guys in this Olympics. I know that Eric Little has sort of the thing about his religion coming to conflicts, and that made headlines, which is probably the most interesting conflict or story conceit at all in this movie. But outside of that, neither of these guys are particularly interesting. Nothing that happens to them or that they do is particularly interesting. And it really makes this film just feel like a story that you can tell, but why? I mean, really, that's my question. Why did this need to be a movie, and especially a Best Picture winner in a year which, by the way, also nominated for Best Picture was Raiders of the Lost Ark?
I wish you hadn't told me that, because that's gonna be a hard one for me to reconcile. I'm a big Raiders fan. Here's what I'll say. Right, I watched this movie with my parents. My dad is a big fan of this movie. He watched it growing up. So upon returning to it, he enjoyed it just as much. Me, on the other hand, felt like, let's bring a little Raiders in. It feels like we're on a treasure hunt here. We're panning for gold. You got to sift through a lot of sand before you find anything, the gold in this movie. Because I think it's very sparse. When the film has a lot of energy behind it, when we are competing, when we are training, when we're doing these things, obviously the film is pretty kinetic. And I think there's some pretty interesting dialogue exchanges here too that I'm sure we will get into. But these moments really are few and far between in a film that feels kind of quiet and meandering. And I agree with you, Tanner, in the sense that there is a very interesting film in here. I think maybe if we had chosen to focus in on something, whether that was the religion, whether that was the sort of politics at Cambridge, we sort of take a fly over a lot of material, and because of that, I don't think we really land on anything that feels especially compelling. And so there's just some interesting action sequences, but a lot of just fairly standard filmmaking that I didn't find particularly compelling.
I find that when I start thinking about the story, something that comes up for me is the stakes. There are stakes in stories, and a lot of times films go all the way and blow out the stakes, where making them life or death, existence of the human race or whatever. And in this one, the stakes are so low that the consequences for not succeeding in this film, to me, are not that bad.
Bronze medal, maybe.
Yeah, I'm like okay. I'm kind of okay with these characters failing because the film hasn't set up why it's so important. The film, is Tanner? Okay, yeah, go ahead.
There's just an example that I caught while watching this movie that is a great example of what you're talking about. This film has like negative stakes. So maybe like the high point of tension in this film is when Eric Liddell gets told that the qualifying race for the 100-meter dash is on a Sunday, and he can't participate because he's a man of God. He's very dedicated to his religion. He's like, "What? No one told me this. I'm outraged. I can't compete. I'm so committed to my religion in this way. And I guess what am I gonna do?" And then one of his friends is just like, "Oh, I'll switch with you." And that happens like a few minutes later. And they're like, okay, well, that situation is completely diffused.
Well, it's not just a few minutes later. It's after he comes to terms with that. The entire world comes to terms with that being like a huge headline. And then he sits in a room with like a bunch of high-ups that have the conversation for like 5 or 7 minutes. So it's not an immediate turn. And that entirely is just cut off by like, oh, yeah, you want to do a little swap? Haha. And then that entire conflict is just washed away
by like a C tier,
like footprints in the sand.
It's not like it's not like a character who we've come to know and love. It's like a C tier guy that we saw a few times. Like, oh, I'll switch with you, and then that's it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I do find that the film doesn't have a super strong conflict arc in my mind. Our conflict doesn't really get established, and it doesn't really get developed in a way that draws me in and makes me interested, like a lot of other films do. And so I find myself not like hating that. It's more meandering, and these are elements of storytelling in films that I like sometimes. But in this case, because of that lack of conflict, I find it boring. I find nothing to grab onto and nothing to just get interested in.
Yeah. A comment that Tucker made when we were talking about Hamlet was the idea that film felt like it was being made for an in-group, right? And I feel that applies pretty strongly here, because when you think about an interesting sports story, an interesting athlete, I think that there's a sort of struggle that comes along with that. So you watch them struggle before you watch them overcome and succeed. And part of my problem, on top of some of the writing being convenient in this sense, is that these are just kind of like affluent Cambridge men. One's a rugby player, the other's just like this nice college-aged guy, and he's going to Cambridge, right? I don't think that this film does a very good job establishing them in a way that you want to root for what they believe, right? It just feels like, okay, here's a couple nice guys, and ultimately maybe that plays to a specific crowd if you do come from that sort of college educated background, right? And you care about the Cambridge politics, or you care about that religious component. But if you don't, what is there to grab onto? What is the hill for them to climb? You know, I think that it goes beyond writing. It goes into who the characters are, kind of subsequently who they aren't.
Yeah. I mean, there, like I said, there are the makings of a great film in here. I mean, our Harold Abrahams, he says it's told to us multiple times that he's had to overcome anti-Semitism in the college system, in the athletic system, and if we followed specifically him, that would have been, and we got to see more of him, you know, running into those constant hurdles for a little track and field joke for you there. Then that would have been better. Or if we focused in on Eric Little and like his really like complex internal conflict of like, all my entire family is telling me to give up running, but running is the way that I glorify God, and they view it as some like frivolous pastime. But splitting the narrative between these two guys makes them both seem quite shallow in that respect, even though they tell us the things that are quite interesting if we explored them more.
Yeah, I mean, the theme of this movie is actually something that's pretty interesting. It's what inspires you to do what you do, right? Mm-hmm. It's what pushes both these guys to want to be the best that they can. It's the differences in their backgrounds that cause them to want to do this. And I think that's an interesting theme, and I wish they'd been played out a little stronger, because you're talking about both those characters with their religion and the anti-Semitism. Those are interesting factors to push them to do what they want to do. But when you do split the screen time, you're right, they can't really develop either of them in any particularly strong way. And while I do think it's good that the screen time is split between the two of them, and it does tell both of their stories pretty much on the same level. Like, you don't really feel like one is more forefronted than the other. That's good. But also, the fact is that the movie feels a little bit disjointed because of that, because there's very little, if almost no, overlap between the two of them. And it feels like it's telling two different stories, which means it doesn't feel like a coherent story. And I think that when I finish up the movie and I'm like, okay, you know, it kind of feels like I only got part of a story here. And that's about it, because the screen time is so split and there's really no connective tissue. We're talking about the connective tissue. That's what's really lacking.
Yeah, it's also not that long of a film. It's only a little under 2 hours, and so you get not very much time, like physically, to talk about these different stories. I think that also with Abrams' character, or Abraham, is it Abraham or Abrams? That's what his last name.
I think people kept calling him Harold Abrahams.
Okay, well,
yeah.
Oh yeah. On the website it says it's Abraham's. He also has this romance plot that is thrown in there.
So weak,
devoid of conflict, and the characters are. He says, "Wow, this woman is very attractive. I'm going to ask her out." He does. He's successful, and they're in love. And then there's some conflict in the second half where she honestly
he's not focusing on her because he wants to focus on running, and that makes her kind of sad, which is reasonable.
I guess that's what happened, but I did not understand that while I was watching it. So,
Sure.
To that point, actually, I didn't really get the feeling that the points about anti-Semitism or sort of religious conviction were that important to the characters either. And I think it comes back to this issue of there being too much going on, because sure, there's those conflicts, but the conflicts never come to a head, really. You hear about them, and there's the scene where Abrams has dinner with the heads of Cambridge, and they're talking about his like shifted attitude, and he's got a professional coach, and they're being racist towards the coach for being part Arab, right? And we see a little of it there, but ultimately the reason why I feel like these characters come off as though they don't really have any kind of conflict for us to overcome is because there never feels like these sequences have any actual tension. It feels like, okay, we have the antagonist here, we have the sort of prejudice that they're imposing upon these characters, but really we spend no time on unpacking that at all. This is a film that I feel is so focused on moving from plot point to plot point and sort of surface level idea to surface level idea that we don't actually take time to where you connect to any of these struggles at all. And I think that the relationships really that both men have are pretty much emblematic of that for me.
You mentioned showing. I was going to say earlier about the religion that while we are shown fairly well, what what Eric's religious convictions are and how that is affecting his life. We're not shown what Abraham's is. You know, we are told to us that he is Jewish, and we are told that he has faced adversity as a result of that, and we are shown none of it. He is materially the same as the other characters in the film. And so if you're going to make a big point about him being Jewish and not really brand the film that this is like a story about prejudice in, you know, early 20th century England, but you know, that idea is kind of there, and then that never really pans out in the film. He's Jewish, and it's a plot point or a line, points of dialogue, but not really points of plot, I would say. There's a distinction between the two.
Sure.
Yeah.
I want to talk about, you know, the particularly what this film should be hinged on if it's not the characters, and that is the actual scenes of running, the action sequences of this film. And what I felt was also quite lackluster there. This film has a very limited bag of tricks when it comes to what it uses to dramatize those running sequences, and as a result, they're very short. And I get we're doing like 100 to 400 meter races there, so those do end up being very short. But the point of a film is to drag those out, make it suspenseful, give it tension, and maybe layer some things on top of there. If anything, this is maybe the only time I'll say this. This film should have taken lessons from the Wachowski sisters' Speed Racer. Because there is the final race sequence in Speed Racer is this, you know, it is like the final stretch of this car race, and it's layered with story moments and character beats that you remember from earlier in the film, and those are coming to a head, and the music is laid over top of that, and we're cutting to all these different characters that we've seen multiple times help out our protagonist. And that makes it, for maybe a not great film, a very, very good scene. But this film doesn't have any of that. It is very bare bones in those race sequences when it should be the exact opposite.
If you're going to have this big stadium full of people and all these extras and you're going to do this running scene, you got to punch it up. It's a movie.
Yeah.
I think the thing is they punch it up by doing slow motion, which admittedly is slow motion done very well. I think the reason this movie is influential and still considered to be something that's important is because it did pioneer that style of slow motion and recording people doing all this stuff and the really detailed action in terms of how they're running. But also, I mean, let's be real. This is a racing movie, all things considered, I mean, factually, and that slow motion makes the racing sequences very slow. This is a slow racing movie, and that's such a weird juxtaposition that it doesn't feel right. It feels really out of place for what this movie should be. Is the speed of these guys? You can't feel it because all you see is their arms flopping around, and what Tanner, as a runner, informed me is very poor form.
Yeah. Let me tell you, these guys are terrible athletes. Athletics in 1924 were still not great, but these guys are, I don't know if it's the actors' performances or maybe just they are being accurate to how people ran back in the 1924 Olympics, but Eric Little, flails his arms out and starts slowing down before he crosses the finish line. So, I don't know what to make of that, if that's a bad performance or just accurate.
What I think it is just overwrought filmmaking. It reminds me a lot of, to pull in more poor movies into this conversation, reminds me of like the Ezra Miller Flash running debacle where he runs splayed out all over the place, because I think that the intent there and the intent here is to sort of communicate like a sense of energy as they're moving, because ultimately good running form is not particularly interesting to look at. It's very mechanical, right? And I think the problem they run into here is that a really fast Olympic 100 meters is going to be like a 9-second race, 10-second race. And because of that, first of all, you got a logistical problem, because I guarantee your actors can't run an Olympic pace, right? So you can't shoot that in regular speed, or it's going to be ridiculous. Right. But then you take it to this place where it feels overwrought, and then it loses all of its tension anyway. I think all of the race sequences are completely uninteresting, where I think that where these sequences feel more fun is when we're seeing training montages. Now, I'm a big sucker for a training montage, and I think there are some pretty good ones here, right? I think probably my favorite is when they're trying to establish, and by the way, another conflict that never really gets paid off, the Americans being this incredibly fast running team. seeing them train and the guys like kicking up in the air and they're doing clap push-ups off the bench and everything, right? Like that's just sort of fun, like camaraderie, sports spirit stuff that I think was compelling. It didn't feel overwrought and goofy. But again, it's like we see these secondary characters do that, and then the secondary characters lose all of their races, and it's only through throwaway dialogue that we learn there's some kind of tension there. I think we do get a couple good training sequences, right, with Abrams and his coach, like when he's running alongside the motorcycle, running alongside the car, doing the high knee kicks and everything, right? But even that, it feels like it's not paying off anything in the end, right? You know, when does he use his big move that he learned, right? Okay, he got the letter, and in the letter, and he got the necklace, right? But here's how you write your movie. We established at the beginning he's taking the wrong sized strides, right? Very common mistake. But why didn't that like come back at the end of the movie, right? It just feels like we're telling a bunch of disconnected little scenes here, and that made the action feel kind of poor.
It's kind of hard to tell how our athletes, our character athletes, are progressing. Kind of hard to tell if they're actually like better than they were at the beginning of the film.
Great point. Yeah.
Yes.
I think also a lot of this tension and lack of character and stuff is also a huge problem. That is just, this is a really poor supporting cast of characters around these two. I think the only exception being Ian Holm's character, the trainer guy, Sam Musabini. He's got a personality to him. He's got a history to him. He's got a relatively interesting relationship with Harold, but he's kind of the only exception, and everyone else around them is just an athletic British white guy. And so everyone feels the exact same. They all feel the exact same niches. They all act in similar ways. And I got side characters mixed up with the main characters all the time. Just from visuals, I'm like, oh, oops, I got them mixed up. Oh, who lost the race here? Like, I visually, it was very samey because, there's a bunch of the same looking guys. And personality-wise, they're all basically the same. And that just makes it very hard for things to be clear. I don't, and I'm actually going to I have a bunch of facts, but I'm going to throw one of them in here, is this movie the original screenplay, was intended to have a third runner from the 1924 Olympics. Let me find my thing here.
So these are real people?
Yes, all of this is based on true story.
So that's why I was going to assume that's why this film was made, is because these were a true story, and to British people, this is probably a point of pride in this moment where they overcame the Americans and they won in Paris and something like that we just don't know because we're not in the culture.
Yeah, so the fact is that the script initially included a third Olympic runner named Douglas Lowe, but he was replaced with the fictional character of Lord Andrew Lindsay when the person still alive, refused to have anything to do with the film. So they just introduced another generic British white guy as like the third tier runner. And that's it. And I think that's a very good example of the film can just, these characters are replaceable. They're totally nothing, and you can just literally replace one with a fictional character and you'll never tell the difference.
Yeah. Tucker, I'll thank you for a while ago shouting out Ian Holm, because I'm going to use that as a sort of forcible segue into talking about the wins and noms of this film.
Oh yes.
Because Ian Holm was nominated for Best Supporting Actor in this. Aside from Best Picture, Chariots of Fire also won Best Original Screenplay and Best Costume Design, as well as Best Original Score, which is deserved. But Best Costume Design...
That's interesting.
It was probably accurate to 1924, so there's that.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't made that long. I mean, in the scheme of things, it's not like we do in costumes from the 1600s. They had photos and video, film tape of what was happening then. So they could probably get pretty dang close to what the costumes actually look like. I don't hate the costumes in this film. I think there's interesting distinctions. I like the athletic uniforms they wear in the opening ceremony, and you've got all this. Essentially, a prestige corps is what I would call it, a look of early 20th century, high class, college educated, all the tweed and the suits and those sweaters and that stuff. I think it's going to feed into a little bit larger thing for me. It's kind of aesthetic. It kind of is visually appealing to me in this very earth tone way.
Sure. I should also say, and I want to talk about this when I'm done with the wins and noms here. Vangelis also won Best Original Score or Vangelis. I don't know how to
Vangelis.
pronounce it.
Okay. Oh my God. I'm very glad you said that because I was
Okay.
listening to this and saying, "Holy crow! Does this sound like Blade Runner
Well,
music?"
yeah, that's because Vangelis wrote
Vangelis,
both of them.
okay.
Yeah, it makes
I did
sense.
not realize that.
One of the lords
Okay.
of synth.
Yes, he is
and-
awesome.
So I
Nominated
actually
again
okay.
for Ian Holm, and Best Director Hugh Hudson was nominated as well, and the film editing was also nominated. I'm done.
Okay, I want to circle back to that Vangelis note because thoughts on the soundtrack. It won. What do you, Abram? I know you're a
Yeah.
Blade Runner guy. What do you think of Vangelis as and the style of the soundtrack in this film?
Yeah, so like I said, I was like, it really sounds like Blade Runner. And okay, so it is Vangelis, and that's why I think it's really great. I think that this is an example where a score elevates a film, and it's you can look to a lot of very famously scored films and say the same thing, right? And I think that his synth works very well when we are moving in such slow motion, right? I think that that's the moments where it hits the best and where it sort of compensates for that overwrought nature for me. While when you take a step back, it's like, okay, they look very goofy. He's got like the horse lips and they're flapping and he's running like a lunatic, right? But with the music behind it, I do think there's at least something compelling about that, and I do think it brings it. I don't know if religious is the right word, but I think there is a little bit of awe that is brought into these sequences because of the score. So I do think that the film would be a lot weaker without it.
I think that's because the score is the most unique thing about this movie by
Yes.
far. I mean, you could have easily just plugged in some bland orchestral stuff, but the fact that they chose a guy who does music in an entirely different style from almost any of the Best Picture winners or any of the movies that we see, especially not drama biopics of like 20s like running, what you plug in a synth score there and it's like, oh, okay, this is an out of place but really interesting aspect of the filmmaking that makes this film more interesting, and I think that's probably for my opinion the most deserved win, maybe the only deserved win for this film, because the edit, or I think you said it was nominated for editing, like
Yes.
editing, fine. I guess it's intercutting between stories.
The writing isn't
The
particularly
screenplay,
great.
yeah. But like the score, I didn't know that it was the same guy as Blade Runner. Blade Runner's got cool music. I'll give you that. But
Yeah.
But I do like that it was so unique. Yeah.
Yeah.
The reason I ask about that is because I was a little unsure of whether I liked or didn't like the score in the film. I'm kind of neutral on it. I do like its moments. The main theme is iconic. It works super well in that scene, in the running on the beach scene towards the beginning, which, a little aside, is like a total one-off and doesn't make any sense. Just happens, and then you're like, okay, yeah, well, that was the scene that I was expecting from this movie, and why is it where it is? Who knows? But at times when we are not in those slow motion sequences, I felt like the score was a little out of place. And then the use of diegetic music that isn't music that is diegetic, but not until a little while later we start to hear it before we see where it's coming from, feels extra weird, because I'm like, wait, but I thought this was a Vangelis score. Why am I hearing like regular film music? So I got a little confused while watching it. But like the actual music, I think, is very good, and I love synthesizers, and we've got some great synthesizers in this score. Can't deny that.
Timo, I'm going to refer to you for a little question on my most random bit of trivia here.
Okay.
Because Timo, do you know what a gopher on a movie set would be? You're probably closest to movie sets of all of us here.
A gopher?
You know what a
Are you?
Yeah.
Is it spelled like the rodent with a PH?
Gofer.
That might be a British spelling of a gaffer. I don't really know.
Okay. Well,
What's
in
the
case
piece
you're
of
wondering,
trivia? Hit me with it. I might be able to decipher.
Sir Kenneth Branagh was a gopher for this shoot, as well as an extra in one scene. He's a Cambridge student in the Society Day crowd, and he's on screen for roughly 20 seconds. But Kenneth Branagh's in this film and worked on it.
Huh. Well, probably not a gaffer. Gaffer is a.
You've also got you got the guy that plays the Dursley father. In a big role in this. That was fun. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was like, oh hey, Harry Potter guy.
I will
But
say,
also,
I'm glad you. To respond to what Tanner just said, I'm glad you raised that part about like the activities fair that they go to.
Yeah.
Why was that in the movie? This sort of speaks to me about this movie speaking into an in group. Like, if you care about Cambridge, right, then I feel like that scene matters.
Well,
but if you don't, does it really to anything else that happens?
I think
This film wasn't
it's
even-
fun, but I don't think it matters.
The film wasn't even shot at Cambridge. Cambridge refused to have the filming there for some reason. And
it's because they were afraid of the anti-Semitism from the higher-ups.
Okay.
They were like, no, let's not do this. And then later on, they regretted it because the movie was successful.
Yeah, of course.
Of course.
But I would actually push back a little bit on that the activity fair thing and everything about the Cambridge, because I think that that's part of the film that has the most personality. The kids or the college students being proud of their alma mater and like singing and camaraderie and all of that, and especially that sequence where Abrams is running around the courtyard and under a minute or whatever. All of that is really unique and has a lot of like fun energy to it between the characters. At this point in the movie, though, we don't know any of the characters' names or their personalities or what's going on, but I actually liked those sequences because it felt like they had a little more energy and personality than the rest of it. And I think especially when you hit, funnily enough, the Olympics, the movie just slows to a crawl, and that's so funny to think about. But I hate to pull back the curtain a little bit, but Tanner Dykstra didn't see about maybe a half or a third of that last act because and he didn't really miss much. He didn't really miss much, but nothing really happens because it's just the slow motion running sequences for like a half hour.
I woke up around the time the credits started to roll, and Tucker turns back to me and he says, "They both won their races." I'm like, "All right, that's good."
Yeah.
To be fair, for any purists out there, I did pull up the ending on YouTube, so I did see those sequences. And I'm like, well, there's not a lot here. So there you have it.
So I know, Tucker, you've got some thinkings and some ramblings about production. First, though, I want to go into a little bit of filmmaking fundamentals because I have two thoughts about the filmmaking. This film, I said it earlier, I actually like how this film is shot. I find it like very pleasing to look at. The frames are nice. Like, the color is very, it has that antique feel to it, but it's still fairly saturated. We get these nice earth tones, and there are some nice shots here and there. I think the way it cuts between scenes is pretty good. I found the sound mix on this film to be like almost unlistenable. The dialogue is unintelligible. It does not help that these guys are speaking in thick accents, but the way it's mixed, you can do thick accents. Movies from this era did it. You can understand them. In the middle of the mix is where the dialogue sits, and man, is it hard to understand. I really contemplated turning on subtitles. I don't really like to watch movies with subtitles because it proves to me whether or not the mix is good. But
subs are epic.
I almost needed them because I couldn't understand any of the dialogue most of the time. Not the fault of the dialogue, the writing or the performances. It's just the way it was engineered. They needed another pass. They needed another pair of ears to go, wait a second, can you actually understand what anything is being said right now?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, to jump in there really quick, I completely agree. And I was watching, we got a new TV in like my living room upstairs. We don't typically watch movies there because there's no like sound bar, but that's where we end up watching. And so you can really tell, especially on lower end speakers, when a mix is not right because you don't have like that surround sound to compensate. So I was really scratching my head, and it's never a good sign when just a fundamental element of just making a film takes you out of the experience, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I would much rather be taken out by a creative choice than what feels like for this scale of production, an amateurish move. So that for me was a pretty big negative of this film.
Yeah. I will say I did my due diligence. I listened to it both on headphones and big nice speakers. Both cases, not good.
Tucker.
So, Tucker, you've got your production facts. I'm really interested to hear about what some of these are. Because
I do.
I actually, for me,
I was able to go through a few of them. We mentioned a couple of them earlier, but I got so much for this movie that I was able to backfill and get some extra things. One thing that you were mentioning earlier, Timo, how this was from an era where they had film and pictures and stuff like that, so you can do the research very well to get it to be super accurate. And the screenwriter, Colin Welland, actually did a ton of research for the script. One interesting thing that he did was take out advertisements in the London newspapers asking people who were there to share their memories of the Olympics. And he also went to the National Film Archives to look at pictures and of the footage and races and stuff. And he also interviewed a lot of people who were still alive from that to get their actual opinions and memories of it. So he did a lot of research. And I think it does show in terms of the production design and the costumes and all of that being really high quality. Another interesting thing is that the producer, David Putnam, he chose the director, Hugh Hudson, because he was an award-winning documentary and advertisement filmmaker. He had never directed a feature film before, which I think is really interesting. And I don't think the direction is terrible in this movie. But
I think it's just a little bland, quite honestly.
Yeah, and I think he wanted it to be covered like a documentary of the Olympics or something.
Sure.
I just think that's kind of interesting. Also, Ben Cross, the actor for Harold Abrams, was discovered while playing Billy Flynn from Chicago.
Oh.
And which was obviously later adapted into a film and won Best Picture. So you got a little interconnection there. But that's fun.
A little synergy.
And the final thing, and this is the funniest and weirdest thing, is that the film was actually altered for a U.S. release. The scene of Abrahams and Montague encountering the two World War I vets at the beginning at the train station was added because the swearing of those characters brought the rating up from G to PG. And the studio wanted that because G rating was associated with children's movies, and they didn't want this to be a kid's movie. So they added like a 20-second scene to give it a little bit of a rating boost there.
Interesting.
Whatever. Weird.
Yeah.
This movie has a lot of weird crap going on behind it.
I have a bit of tangential, not about the film at all, but about the real world occurrence. The next Olympics will also take place in Paris in 2024, exactly 100 years from the 1924 Olympics.
Wow, okay, that's kind of nice.
And I did my research. I looked up the 1924 Olympics. The Brits can have their little fun making this movie, remembering these two guys. But if you look at the numbers, USA, baby, came out on top. Most golds and most medals overall. Get shit on.
Jesus Christ.
Well, that's very interesting. Thank you for sharing, both of you. Those are, yeah, okay. That makes sense a little bit about the director. I think the director one is probably the most relevant, but I liked all of those facts. Let's, what do you say to finding out where it goes on the list? How does that sound?
Why not?
You know what, Timo? Let's do it. Let's do it, Timo.
Everyone type in their magic number on their magic sheet.
I got my magic keyboard to type my magic number in the magic sheet.
Hover them middle fingers over that enter button.
All right.
I will.
Okay, and punch it in. Do it. Hit that number.
Bop.
Okay, very close together here.
Very close together. This is quite interesting. The film gets a ranking of a 5.4. And the individual point breakdown goes as follows. At the top, Tanner gave it a 5.7. I followed up with a 5.6, followed by Tucker's 5.3, and finally, Abrams' 4.9. That's not even a full point spread there. We were very unanimous in what we thought of that film. So any thoughts on why you gave it the score that you did, maybe, Abrams, since you gave it the lowest score, just below our midpoint?
Yeah, so when I think of flat 5, I think of that's a flat average movie, right? In the comparison of our best pictures here, and for me, I think it is as close to being there as possible while being just a little bit below. So 4.9 felt appropriate for me because I think that, as Timo was saying, that there is a nice look to the film. There is a lot of work that went into it. It is clearly a film that was made by people who care and who wanted to make an interesting depiction of these events. And to an extent, I think they succeed. But my problem, as we were talking about, is that I never felt any connection to the characters. And I think that in an athlete-focused sports movie, that is a huge issue. And for me, it comes down to the issue with how these stories were told. Sure, as we were saying, as Timo, I think, smartly said, there's a difference between how things unfold in dialogue and in the plot, and that disjunction led to the entire film feeling flat. And so while I did like many of the running sequences, even though they felt kind of overwrought, and I thought that the training sequences were a lot of fun, I don't know, I just didn't find there to be a lot to grab onto because I don't think the film was assembled in a way that really lets you into these characters, especially if you have no previous kind of opinion on the relationship between athletics and religion or this sort of aesthetic, or we don't have any national pride for Britain, as believe not I don't. I just felt like if you did not check any of those boxes, the film really was not interested in telling the story in a way that brought you into.
Yeah.
I'll note that our list placement for this film, it's going to sandwich right in between Out of Africa and Hamlet. 0.3 below Out of Africa and 0.4 above Hamlet at place number 35 out of 42.
Solid. I think for me, the reason this is just in the 5 range is because well-made movie. There's nothing incredibly wrong with it. I think Timo mentioning the sound mixing is probably the biggest technical ding against it. But in the end, it does come down to the lack of universality to this. It's not made for people in the future to really understand it because we have no idea what happened in the 1924 Olympics. It's not really made for people outside of Britain to enjoy it. It's not really made for people who aren't familiar with all of these different things to enjoy it. And that's something that really dings it for me. I think the best picture winners are the ones that have that universality, tell a story that anyone can connect to, and also have a ton of entertainment value. And this one was just pretty boring, if we're being honest. For me, I think it's probably one of the most bored. Probably the most bored I've been with one of these Best Picture winners. Maybe not the most, but certainly up there. And I just have no draw to come back to this film to analyze it in any particular way. I think it's an interesting point in history that this won Best Picture and also is considered one of the best British films of all time. Like, it's up in their top 20 of holy shit, the Brits are making great cinema. And I don't really feel that coming from my perspective.
The British must love this movie because in doing some trivia research of my own, when they hosted the Olympics in 2012, they replayed that Vangelis score over and over. They played it in the opening ceremony. They played it when the British people came out during the opening ceremony. They played it during the races. They played it during the closing ceremony. They really hammered that score home. So they are probably very proud of this film, and good on them. Sure, why not?
Yeah, I mean,
they got to win.
They did. Yeah, it's something. The gold medal, nothing to say boo-hoo to. I'm pretty much in line with all of you guys. It's a 5 movie for sure in my book. Just kind of right there in the middle. Not a huge amount of issues. It definitely fell below the boring threshold, which is no longer The Last Emperor. That's not the boring threshold anymore. But just in case you're wondering, it's below The Last Emperor. And yeah, like Tucker said, I just left kind of bored, kind of head empty, kind of like, wow, that was a movie that I've seen and don't really have a strong desire to think about it. You know, with our movies at the top of the list, all of them make me think. They make me want to delve in deeper. Oh, why is it like this? What does this character moment mean? You know, what does this make me feel? This one just kind of doesn't do that. So,
sure.
Okay. But should we try to search? Should we try to please the gods of random chance and try to give us a movie that does make me think? Because I think I'm into that. I think it's time to move on and spin that oh so sweet spin wheel.
Alrighty. Yeah, baby.
Okay, so I've got to put up, warm up those
51
pipes.
pictures left, boys.
We are close to what next week will be 50.
Next week will be 50 left. Incredible. We're really chugging along at rapid pace here, or one a week if you're following at home. Tanner,
Constant pace, yeah.
You ready?
I'm ready. Wheel, what's your deal? Give us a movie that makes us squeal. Is it on digital or is it on real? Wheel, what's your deal?
Whoa, that's a pretty big number. Out of 51 films, we got 45. So we're going to go way back into the ye olden times. What film could this possibly be? Tucker, do you have it pulled up?
Yeah, we're getting an interesting film here, not just because it's going to be particularly exciting, but because it's old and I think that makes it a little bit unique in terms of what we've been reviewing recently. 1935, Best Picture winner, directed by Frank Lloyd and starring two pretty big names, Charles Laughton and Clark Gable. We're watching Mutiny on the Bounty.
Mutiny on the Bounty.
Yeah.
So this is a film that I think I've heard, and we're not going to be watching the 1962 version, correct?
No, 35 version.
1935. It's a boat movie. We got a boat movie. We got some some naval lads.
Okay. Anyone got a runtime for me?
135.
2 hours and 12 minutes.
Okay. Well, that's actually pretty good for a movie back then. So, I mean, I'm looking forward to it. Black and white boat movie. Let's see what they could do with these boats. That's going to be my.
Oh yeah, you got to get the good models.
Oh yeah.
Got to compete with that Ben-Hur sequence.
True, very true.
Yeah, Ben-Hur.
It's not gonna.
Ben-Hur was many years later, so a little.
True. Yes.
A bit of an unfair comparison, and we haven't seen it yet, so let's hold off then. But I'm looking forward to this. We will talk about it next week. Thank you for joining me and discussing Chariots of Fire. And if I could get the rights holding to that song, I would like to play it right now, but I don't think I can play bum 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 bum.
Timo, your singing's too good. They're going to copyright claim this video.
Dude, I'm tone deaf. All right, let's see.
The British government is going to copyright claim our video.
Yeah. Well, we'll be back next week to talk about 1935's The Mutiny on the Bounty. See you then. Peace. Hey everybody, hope you enjoyed that episode. It was a pretty fun one to make. Just want to make a quick announcement here before you head out at the end of the video. We will be taking a 1-week break from Quest. Abram is going to be off in California and we've got stuff to do in real life. So just a quick 1-week break. We will be back with Mutiny on the Bounty in 2 weeks' time. So look out for that. It should be a pretty fun episode as well. Thank you guys for sticking around. Of course, hit like and subscribe. Follow the Discord. Maybe hit up the letterbox. Do it all those fun stuff. You know what it is. Just, well, you know what to do. Okay, well, see you then. Peace.